welcome to this session entitled Flipping More Than the Classroom, How COVID-19 Changed Partnerships for Education. My name is Anna Muru. I work for VVOB, Education for Development, as the Global Strategic Advisor for Partnerships, and I am based in Zambia. I am the moderator for this session, which is part of the SCOL World Forum Ecosystem Day, and it is wholly curated and hosted by VVOB and STIR Education. In this session, we'll be hearing how 3 organizations working in different geographies adjusted their strategies and partnerships in the face of the COVID-19 disruptions. Our session is planned for 1.5 hours, but we will try to finish a bit earlier so that you can have time for a break before you move to another session. Before we start, I would like to inform you that the webinar is being recorded and that there are some housekeeping rules that you must be aware of. So all attendees are automatically muted. If you want to ask a question, there are 2 options. So either you raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your screen. We'll then unmute you when it is your turn to ask your question. Or you can type your question in the Q&A box, so not in the chat box. And these questions will be transferred and posed to the panelists during the Q&A session. The Q&A session will take place after all the panelists have spoken, and that's when we will tackle them. But please feel free to raise your hand while the panelists are still talking, and we'll give you the floor as soon as they're done. Please make sure to also clarify who the question is directed to so we have a smoother process. Now, let me start by welcoming our panelists, and I will start with Dr. Nicholas Dowdall. Nicholas is an evidence specialist at the Lego Foundation, working for the South Africa Initiative from the Johannesburg office. In his role, he has oversight of all research and learning activities within the South Africa Initiative and works closely with partners on implementation of projects. He has a special interest in parenting interventions, ECD policy and systems development, and quantitative approaches to testing parenting and education interventions. Welcome, Nicholas. Then we have Nguyen Bao Chow. Chow is a project coordinator of the VVOB Vietnam iPlay project, which focuses on the integration of learning through play for Vietnamese young learners in primary schools. Chow has extensive experience managing education programs in the Vietnamese context, and he has also extensive experience with adolescents. Our last panelist is Pavan Kumar. Pavan is Senior Manager, Design and Program Readiness for STIR Education in Karnataka, India. He specializes in curriculum design and pedagogy for school education and teacher professional development. His interests include scaling evidence-based teacher professional development and educational policy and advocacy studies. Currently, he is also a focus group member, curriculum and pedagogy, at the School of Education for National Education Policy 2020 in India. So, great panel we have today, and it's an all-male panel, incidentally. Great, now to the theme of our session. So the COVID-19 pandemic, as you all know, has brought complex challenges to our education systems. These have had to address the massive learning losses caused by school disruptions, the social-emotional fallout of the pandemic among learners and their communities, and they've had to find new ways to support teachers to deal with such challenges in a much changed reality. Unsurprisingly, this has also challenged organizations supporting education system transformation, forcing them to reassess the needs of partner systems and their relationships with governments and other education sector actors. The panel will thus share experiences from the Lego Foundation, from South Africa, VVOB from the Vietnam operations, and STIR Education from their India work on how they have dealt with these new realities and how this has impacted their relationship with government education actors. Together, the panelists will also address how governments, development partners, and funders are creating a new future of philanthropies. Now I will address the questions to the panel. So we can start with Nicholas. Nicholas, how did the COVID pandemic uncover fault lines in the South Africa early childhood development system? And how was this used as a springboard to building back better? Over to you, Nicholas.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna. Can you hear me fine?
Yes,
yep.
We can.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, like in many countries, I think across the world, the pandemic really had a devastating effect on young children in South Africa. But I think for the early childhood development sector in particular, the lack of systems that could serve as networks for supporting the ECD workforce and the children in their care was really affected and exposed. However, in the midst of all of this, and with a shift happening in the ECD landscape in South Africa, where responsibilities of government departments were changing in relation to ECD, some really important opportunities emerged for stakeholders to come together and partner with government to build back more resilient systems for the early childhood development sector that would ultimately serve children better. So I'm going to share some experiences from the perspective of the Lego Foundation working in South Africa in terms of our collaborations with government over the last couple of years, with a big emphasis on early childhood development. Next slide, please. So I think first of all, it's important to maybe give a little bit of context to the story and to the process that is currently sort of unfolding in South Africa. So in 2019, in the annual State of the Nation address given by the president, and in this case, President Cyril Ramaphosa, it was announced that the responsibility for early childhood development would be shifting from the Department of Social Development to the Department of Basic Education. And so that announcement really set in motion a process of planning and really trying to figure out how this could be done in a way that would not disrupt the sector and really ultimately improve things. But I think also it's important to understand in the South African context how early childhood development is kind of structured. So there's not, unlike in basic education and both primary and secondary, there isn't public provision for early childhood development in South Africa. It's mainly provided at a community level. So NPOs, sort of micro social enterprises, private providers, and then in some cases, those ECD programs are subsidized by the government. But the ECD sector has really faced some significant challenges over the years, and those include challenges with being able to register and with the registration process, challenges with accessing funding and sufficient amounts of funding, challenges around infrastructure for ECD centers and upgrading of that infrastructure, challenges around qualifications of the educators and practitioners that are working in these ECD programs. So even pre-pandemic, this was the sort of the lay of the land and some of the significant challenges that were being experienced by the sector. And then there was this announcement that this function shift would be taking place and ECD would move to basic education. Next slide, please. And then the pandemic hit. And like for all of us, the world was turned upside down. But for ECD in particular, the pandemic hit really hard with severe lockdowns, and the sector really suffered. So programs had to close. They lost, in many cases, all of their income overnight. And the lack of a system was really exposed. So some research that was done sort of shortly after the first lockdowns really exposed the amount that the sector was sort of was suffering. So this one report that I've highlighted here, the plight of the ECD workforce, just showed how in almost all cases parents had stopped paying fees. a great many of these programs, around 85%, weren't able to pay salaries to their staff or cover their basic operating costs. Almost 70% of the programs were really worried that they wouldn't be able to reopen as a result of this shock. And unlike in other systems, like in the primary and secondary education system, the ECD sector wasn't really well set up to receive support. So because not many of these programs were registered with the government and with the Department of Social Development, it really made it difficult for them to be able to access support and relief during this really trying period. So the government had trouble sort of, even where there were funds available to distribute to ECD programs that were really in need, there wasn't a network to do that. And I mean, another case is with vaccine rollouts. It was more straightforward in the basic education sector to roll out vaccines to teachers, but for ECD, because of the sort of lack of a system and lack of regulation, it was really tricky in order to roll out vaccines to the ECD workforce. Whereas other organizations, including ourselves, were able to be more agile and able to step in during this really difficult time and provide basic funding for ECD programs to cover costs and use networks of ECD centers that we had already been working with through partners to provide some of this relief. But I think that what this time showed us was that, where there aren't systems in place, it's so difficult to support the most needy ECD programs. You can move on to the next slide now. And ultimately, all of this just resulted in a really devastating impact on children. Some important research was done over the course of the pandemic until fairly recently, known as the NIDS CRAM survey, the National Income Dynamic Study Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey. That's quite a mouthful. But that research, which was with a nationally representative sample, really showed the devastating impact across society, but particularly on education, on hunger. It showed the shocks in terms of attendance at ECD programs sort of dropping overnight and really taking a long time to recover. It showed sort of devastating amounts of hunger in households and with children. And it showed sort of really worrying signs in terms of dropout in the education system down the pipeline. So the effects of the pandemic were swift and severe on children in South Africa. Next slide, please. But in times of I think great worry and despair, often opportunities emerge, and the ecosystem, I think, was able to start thinking about how we could do things differently going forward. I think the combination of both the COVID impact and the function shift from social development to basic education really provided an opportunity for the ECD ecosystem to reimagine what kinds of systems could be put in place to support young children. And that work we now see unfolding and beginning. And from a Lego Foundation perspective, I think that our mantra is often, how we're going to systemically reach children with learning through play. But if a solid system doesn't exist for early learning, like in the case of South Africa, then we really felt we needed to step up and play a part in helping to build that kind of system. So there was a shift in thinking from maybe more programmatic focused work to more systemic and systems building work that took place, at least within our work in South Africa. And yeah, I think that we realized that the most timely and impactful intervention or investments we could make were really to help to build some of these systems that would ultimately create an enabling environment for quality learning through play to thrive. Next slide, please. So what are some examples of what this work looks like? I think the DBE came through really strongly in terms of thinking about how we'd be able to strengthen planning, school readiness, and quality through data and evidence. And two programs were conceptualized by the DBE, the ECD Census and the Thrive by 5. And the Lego Foundation have been very involved in the ECD Census project. I'm mentioning Thrive by 5 because while we haven't been involved in it, it was a parallel project, and the two sort of work in tandem to build the data and evidence. But ultimately, this stemmed from the challenge of a lack of data about ECD in South Africa. The DBE didn't really know what it was that they were taking on. There wasn't quality data on the provision and sort of extent of services out there. And then on the Thrive by 5 side, there wasn't data in terms of how children were faring in terms of child outcomes. And so these two projects were really aimed at building data to inform planning, policy, and implementation. Next slide, please. I'm going to touch a little bit on what the census project was, but at a very high level, and simply, it's a first of its kind project in South Africa where we went out and aimed to locate and map all ECD programs in the country to develop ultimately a national master list of programs that could inform an education management information system for ECD. You can move on to the next slide. So I'm not going to go into much detail here, but just wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot of some of the results that we're seeing, though the final analysis is actually still taking place, and there will be a launch coming up soon with this data. But what this involved was was fieldwork teams going out into every single ward, so over 4,000 wards across every province in South Africa, to track down all ECD programs and gather basic information. So field workers conducted an interview as well as a basic observation of every facility that they were able to track down. In total, over 42,420 ECD programs were located and counted that represent 1.66 million children enrolled, which is about an average of 40 children per ECD program, and there were just under 200,000 staff members that were working at these centers. A couple of other sort of highlights or important pieces of information. We found that only 28% of the programs that we counted and visited were fully registered, and that number increased to 40% where we included conditionally registered programs, but that still shows the majority and significant majority of these programs were not actually registered. And only 33% of all of these programs were receiving any kind of subsidy or support from government. Another quite striking statistic was that almost a quarter of ECD practitioners who were teaching or in teaching roles at these centers had no ECD qualification whatsoever. So this is just a very tiny snapshot of some of the results from the census that are really meant to inform, I think, how the government approaches its support of the ECD sector in the context of the function shift and really what the current lay of the land is. But as I said, the next steps will then be to sort of systematize this data in an EMIS system, which I'll go on to talk about. Next slide, please. I realize I may be taking more time than is needed, so please jump in if I'm taking too long. Anna, how much time? Am I already over?
You're a bit over, but we'll give it another 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll go through this, but Thrive by 5 is an index that's really trying to give a snapshot in the country of how many or what proportion of 4-year-olds are developmentally on track, and this will be conducted on every 3 years to really see how these trends move. Next slide, please. And that Thrive by 5 project was sort of taking place alongside the census to give a nationally representative sample of children and a snapshot of where they are in terms of their development before they enter the basic education system. And it made use of the ELOM child development tool, as well as measures of stunting and socio-emotional development. So what do these big projects mean, and what does it mean in terms of some of the next steps for the sector and for us as the LEGO Foundation supporting these systems? We're now actually about to embark on 2 follow-up projects with the Department of Basic Education. The one is, like I've mentioned, taking the next steps in systematizing this data that we've collected in the census to make sure that it's not just a once-off snapshot, but that it actually becomes a functional system. So we're going to be working with the Department of Basic Education to really figure out how to build a routine information system for early childhood that can really improve the quality and supply of services for young children in South Africa, both at national, provincial, and district levels. And in parallel to that, we're going to be embarking on a deep dive ECD study to really be able to go much deeper into some of the results we've seen through the census and the Thrive by 5. So where children are struggling on particular developmental domains, what is it at the center level that is driving those issues, I guess, and what can be done to turn those around? So it's going to be a much smaller but much deeper study that will build on those results. And finally, I just have a picture to show my last slide of some of the action and the movement. So last Friday, there was a ceremonial handover. And in this picture, you see the Minister of Basic Education and the Minister of Social Development, where there was the handing over of the ECD function. And actually this morning, there was the launch of the Thrive by 5 results. So it's really exciting to see this work and this planning actually now manifesting in the world. And it's an exciting time in the ECD sector in South Africa, where there's an opportunity for the sector to really rally around and reimagine and rebuild these systems in a resilient way. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. This is really exciting to hear, and it's a big plus, I think. So well done to yourself and your team, to the LEGO Foundation, as well as all the other partners who are doing this fantastic work for the children in South Africa. Great. We hope to hear more about this in the Q&A session, but now we'll hand over to Chao. And Chao, from you, we would like to hear how the pandemic and subsequent containment measures have had quite a significant impact in Vietnam over the last years. Has the pandemic strained or otherwise impacted your relationship with your government partners, since you work very strongly with them? And how has that influenced your interaction with them as an organization and as a program? Please give us an overview of that. Thank you. Over to you, Chao. Chao, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Hi, Anna. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share the story from Vietnam. We work in primary education sector, and from VVOB Vietnam, I'm going to share the story how the pandemic changed our relationships with the Ministry of Education and Training in Vietnam. So next slide, please. In 2021, the fourth wave of COVID hit Vietnam seriously. It was the worst wave. So from April to the end of 2021, the COVID was everywhere in Vietnam, spread out in almost 63 provinces in Vietnam with the long quarantine periods. So every offices are closed, school are closed, on services are closed. So basically, people just stay at home. Children don't go to school, and teachers also started to work with the children through the online modality with the basic lesson on online with online modality. With our project, the integrating play-based learning activities for young learners. We are the project funded by the Lego Foundation, and in the first year of 2020, we have worked with the Ministry of Education and Training to develop the two guides on learning through play and the guides for the teachers development activities, the guides for the school leader to use. So we, in the first year of the project, we finished developing the two guides, and then in 2021, according to our plan, we would have to conduct all the trainings on learning through play to the teachers, school leaders, and the staff of the Department of Education and Training in the 8 provinces in our project areas. But because of the COVID, the fourth wave came, and then every activity stopped. And also the professional development activities in those provinces conducted by the government also stopped. So everything stopped. Only the online learning from the teacher to the children were available. Next slide, please. I want to share about the background of the learning modalities in Vietnam. So at that time, the online learning has been used in many schools and provinces. However, it remained the last resort. Many institutions are not yet fully embrace it. So they knew about it. Some of the schools use it, but they are not using it with a warm welcome. So the Ministry of Education and Training also refused the transition to online training for teachers on learning to play. So basically, our project came and discussed with our government partner, the ministries. Okay, now we cannot wait anymore. If we wait for the COVID to stop, and at the time Vietnam didn't have the vaccine for the people yet, so everything was closed. So the government asked us to stop, wait, and then we came to the ministry, and then we discussed if we could not wait anymore. If we wait, then we will be delay of activities, and then the teachers will have no trainings. So we have to prepare and share various scenarios for the online learning, hybrid learning in several discussions. But at first, the government still refused. They didn't trust that it would work. So they said, well, let's wait more until the COVID stop, and then we can continue with the training. But then we had to organize several discussions and share the scenario, how the training would be conducted. And then finally, the ministry agreed to try out. Next slide, please. So with the agreement from the ministry, we were able to conduct the first online training in some province, and then we invited the government to supervise the training with the close supervision from the ministry and also from the local provincial Department of Education and Training involved in very first online trainings. And then they saw that, oh, the training, those one online was still very interactive and still playful. And then the teachers, we got the comments from the teacher who attended the training that they were happy with the training, with the online modality, although this was they were not very familiar with it, with all the online tools, and then it takes us more time to prepare, and also need the better, need good internet connection from the province. But the comments were very good and very positive. So when the ministry saw that the very first training went well, and then they agreed to let the project to continue with other trainings in other provinces. So we were able to organize more training in other provinces, but because of the COVID situation in those provinces were different, so we had to adjust a bit. So some province we can organize a group-based online training. So we have the online trainer, and then the teacher gather in a small group of 10 people or 30 people, In some other school, we have individual based online learning. So with the online trainer on the screen, and each teacher, they stay at home or they stay in their school to participate. So we also have in-person training when with some province when the COVID was a bit over, so we still can organize the in-person training or hybrid training. So different training modalities were applied, and we could organize the training in all 8 provinces of our project. Next slide, please. So throughout the training, we had the staff of the ministry attended in the training, supervised the training, and they were also participated in delivering the training as a trainer with us. So from those trainings, they saw the effectiveness, and they have trust the project more. And after series of training, we came to them again to discuss about development of e-learning material on learning to play to scale up to the rest of the nation, to another 55 provinces in the country, and they were agree and they supported us. So we are on the way of developing the e-learning material so that the ministry can put it in their online library, and then the learning to play techniques will not be shared to the whole country in 55 provinces from now until the end of this year, 2022. So that is a big shift, and from the government point of view, that we can show them from organizing the various training modalities and getting them involved in the trainings. Next slide, please. So we can have some several lessons learned. In pandemic like COVID-19, the close follow-up and discussion with the government partners is very important, and we have to propose to try out the new alternatives. We should not sit and wait the COVID is over, and we have to try out, we have to adapt, we have to change ourselves, and then it will work for the teachers, the professional development. The second lesson that we can learn is that when we come to the government to ask them to move ahead with the project activity, we have to prepare different scenarios, because in each province we have different situation of COVID-19. The different quarantine, different measures were applied, so we have to prepare different scenarios to convince the government partner. And then while we are conducting the training, we also have to adapt to the situation. For example, in one of our province, on the first day, we were applying the online group training. So the trainer was online, and then we had like 30 teachers in a small group. But then in the next day, the pandemic was more serious in that province, and then the local government didn't allow us to have the group of 30 people. So very quickly, we changed to the individual learning. So all the teachers, they didn't gather in 30 people anymore. They came home, and or they stayed at their school, and then we can have the individual online learning again. So we didn't have to stop. And the last lesson is that we have to get government partners involved in the TBD activity so that they understand, and then they will provide more support. This is the lesson in our project, but in another project from VVOB in Vietnam, we also have another thing. During the pandemic, in some provinces, they did not allow the training with the group of 20 people or 30 people. So we had to discuss with the military, and then we discussed with the provincial department of education and training to organize those training in the district. So we decentralized. We go to the district, and then we discuss with the district, so that we break in a smaller group. So, and then the military and the provincial department of education training agree. So we collaborate with them and the district to organize the smaller training. So we still could go ahead with all the training without the delay of the project. That is the lesson from our project in Vietnam that I'm happy to share with you. And we have seen the positive change in the attitudes and the relationships of our project with the government. Here is the Ministry of Education and Training. that is the end of my story in Vietnam. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Chao. That's very interesting and good to hear that you had a closer collaboration actually with the ministry during the pandemic. So very nice to hear about the lessons learned during that experience. Okay, so we'll move on now to Pavan, who's our last panelist, and he will talk to us about how STIR's response to challenges of COVID-19 led to the co-design of a zero-budget virtual network sharing platform, a virtual professional learning space for teachers and educational officials. Pavan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think, our story is something very similar to Chao's story because it's about teachers and official professional development again. A quick intro to our organization. STIR basically is a organization which envisions a world where teachers love teaching and children love learning. Our work is about changing behaviors and attitudes by reigniting intrinsic motivation. Through our programs, we enable iterative improvement of education systems at all levels. When we say all levels, it's about the state level, district level, and at the teacher level. And our programs are largely driven by the priorities and needs of our government partners. And they're all co-designed and system-driven rather than we being at the forefront of design and implementation. Next slide, please. Building on the little context in our state, Karnataka, a small state in India, we are working since 2017 with Directorate of State Educational Research and Training, co-designing teacher network sharing meetings where a group of 20 to 30 teachers come together to share their challenges and best practices, develop action plan to address the specific needs of their classroom challenges. So we ensure that teachers have the autonomy of discussing the challenges that are very relevant to them and master some of the concepts that means a lot to them and that's something that they can take back to the classrooms, which have very clear purpose and hence it's a very purpose-driven sharing meetings that happens down there. And similarly, there exists a peer network for all educational officials as well at all levels of the system, which regularly meets to collaborative reflection and develop action plans, and periodic feedback sessions also take place where each officials receive and take feedbacks from each other. And such network meetings are part of quarterly learning improvement cycles that are co-designed by STIR and the government partner at the state level by a design task force team comprised of educational officials, school leaders, and teachers. We work together to conduct need analysis and content design. Everything was happening well and well received until COVID hit us. Now let's see how things changed during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think like every other part of the world, the outbreak of COVID-19 continued to spread rapidly, and it quickly became clear to us that school would never reopen anytime sooner. So there was a short null period, I would say, a couple of months where we had lost connection with the system completely, and all of our programs halted, and we were very unclear about, the next steps. Same was the case with our government partners. There was a chaos, and we didn't know how to respond. That was the time when a couple of organizations had considered shifting the operations virtually. And however, there were a lot of apprehensions using technology as an alternative at that point in time. So now, having said this, how did we respond? Next slide, please. Yeah, I think, however, the COVID outbreak in India, Hans, we can have all of them together so that we don't, yeah. So however, the COVID outbreak in India coincided with the end of the school's academic year as well, which gave us some time to engage with officials and plan our response. We initially started, the first thing we did is rebuilding connection with the government officials. Most of the times it was one-on-one. During these early months, still engaged regularly with officials at all levels to check on their well-being and understand the challenges that they were facing. And at the same time, the Commissioner of Public Instructions from the department, from the government, brought together several NGOs to seek technological and logistical support to ensure continuity of learning for students. Through this engagement, we realized that there was a very clear lack there was a lack of clarity among the stakeholders about the needs and challenges of teachers. So that was the time when we offered the government to conduct a state level virtual brainstorm for all officials, during which we identified the strong need to extend our support, emotional support to officials and teachers as they work together as a frontline workers during unprecedented times like COVID. And there was a very clear, need that we had identified to prepare all stakeholders for remote engagement. And that's when we co-designed virtual network meetings that focused both on socio-emotional well-being and also on the technology part. We quickly came up with virtual sessions, which were 90-minute sessions for officials at all levels, which focused on preparedness for remote engagement, social and emotional well-being, and planning for transitioning back to schools. And then needless to say, initial days were very harder and extremely challenging. Next slide, please. And as Chow was also sharing with us, the virtual facilitation came with its own set of challenges. The biggest one being a shift in the mindset of the teachers and officials. However, the government has been really open and flexible in adapting to the challenges now. And such willingness from the government led to deeper and more engaged discussions in identifying the needs of teachers and officials. This is one of the major impact that we observed when in the context of our relationships with the government. So this also helped us making interventions more relevant and engaging at the all levels of the system. And also over a period of time, our persistent work with the government led to stronger and more meaningful relationships, placing us better to influence the change within the government, preparing together to face the challenges of school reopening as such. So in one of the program front, we experienced that culture of co-design had begun very swiftly, where government partners started taking equal responsibility and ownership in the design, implementation, and monitoring of the program. That's what we call as the culture of co-design. And this COVID and the school closures, I must say, in some ways became a blessing in disguise. Before COVID, we were operating just in some of the areas, like 8 districts of the state, and virtual platforms enabled us to scale the program across the state, reaching out to all teachers. Since we made better use of available free source technology platforms like Google Meet, Google Forms, and Google Drives, and YouTube channels to share the content, program was run completely on the zero budget mode. And there was overwhelmingly positive response from the teachers and officials, despite initial challenges and pushbacks. And over a period of time, we observed that government officials were highly committed to provide necessary support to the teachers and focus not only on the program delivery part, but also on the emotional well-being of our stakeholders. Teachers and officials now, we feel very happy that they show greater interest in participating in peer networks, and they are actively providing and receiving feedback, proactively reflecting professionally. This is evident from our qualitative and quantitative study of the program outcomes and impact. Now, what are the major outcomes that we have observed? Next slide, please. Yep. Now that we have observed that officials at all levels of the systems, like educational officials and teachers, are very actively engaged, and we saw a greater level of ownership and trust compared to our previous in-person sessions, because the stakeholders fully understood the need and relevance of this content, ensuring that they are intrinsically motivated. With usage of technology platforms like Google Forms, our officials realized the importance of data gathering, analysis, and interpretation, and they realized that it can be more effective and efficient, thus resulting in enhanced objectivity in monitoring and evaluation of the program. And one of the biggest advantages of remote delivery was that teachers and officials are now confident in using technology participating in and hosting virtual meetings and discussions among themselves. With this, teachers are now actively collaborating with each other across the geographical areas, actively sharing learnings and feedbacks. This cross-sharings of learnings and best practices was observed on WhatsApp across the districts and blocks, which encouraged a culture of feedback and peer learning. Based on effectiveness of the remote delivery, we are now considering how we can continue to deliver some of the aspects of our program online, even when in-person training is able to resume in the blended learning mode. And next slide, please. And this is very clearly our next steps and approach to sustain some of the behaviors that we have been observed. And we want to deepen our understanding on the behavior change at all levels of the system and communicating with the same with our government partners. So we believe that this is crucial to integrate our core offerings of peer network, reflection and feedback at the state level, and to sustain our co-design process. And also, having seen the great shift towards the culture of evidence-based design, we want to strengthen it more, and we want to routinize it more. And also, we will look forward to strengthen, or align the state priorities of national education policy, which is happening in India now, especially with reference to teacher education programs. And we'll also look forward to support the state and government partners in better understanding the policies and elements of wherein the behavior change takes a prime focus. So this is what we have been observed post-COVID.
Thank you, Pavan. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now we can open it up for the question and answer session. And we'll start checking if we have any questions. So we've heard here from 3 organizations that are working very closely with governments at system level and how they tackled emerging issues during the COVID pandemic. So let me go quickly and look at the first question, which I think is most relevant for Pavan. So maybe you can start, and for Chao. So the question is, in any of these countries, were there any limits in internet access? In Mexico, for example, many teachers are in parts of the country that do not have internet connectivity. So how did you manage to include the teachers who were not covered by internet connectivity? Yes, so maybe you can respond to that first, Pavan, and then we can go back to Chao. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I would like to say that there was a challenge in terms of internet connections, but it was not a case where there was completely no internet connection. There was connectivity issues, not completely, complete inaccess to the technology, or the internet was not experienced in our state at least. So since most of our, having said this, since most of our content was uploaded to the YouTube channel, we ensured that the teachers who had missed the sharing meetings or the live sessions had access to the YouTube channel content that we had, and we made that the content was designed so in such a way that they were all self-explanatory. And post-sharing meetings, there were follow-up coaching calls that were happening from the district officials to the teachers. And there was an active WhatsApp group where teachers would post and say that this is the point that I'm not understanding, or this is the support I require. And our officials would immediately respond to that. That's how we try to patch up the challenges with internet.
Maybe we can ask Chao to respond to the same question. What is your experience with involving teachers who had no access to the internet during this time? Did you have such situations, and how did the project tackle this?
Actually, in our project provinces, 8 provinces in Vietnam, we have internet connection in all the school. And for some teachers, if they do not have the internet connection at home, they can come to their school and then attend the training, the online training from the school. So basically 3 of the teachers in each school gather in their school, and then in each school we have internet connection. Actually, but in some case, when the teachers stay at home to attend the online individual online learning, we had some problem with the bad connection. they had the internet, but the connection was not so good. So sometimes the teacher use the PC, sometimes they have to use their mobile phone, and use their mobile phone they connect to the 3G wave of the telecom, so that they still can attend the training with us. But I have to say that the bad connection in some poor provinces, some mountainous area also affected our trainings. Sometimes they got in and sometimes they got out.
A follow-up question from the chat is, what devices were being used for the TPD activities? I think this is more related to Pawan's intervention. So Pawan, maybe you can respond to this one.
Yeah, having said another, the technological tools were all open source, like Google Meet or Google, as I said, open sources. The devices that were used for simple smartphones, which most of the teachers in our state has access to. And we made sure to check back with the teachers, if they had access very regularly to such devices. If not, we made sure that the immediate community helped them, the nearby teacher, or yeah, of course, initially it was a challenge when the movement was completely halted. Then slowly we would be kind of overcoming by bringing together teachers in one place or in the community spaces. So it was all smartphones or a basic laptops that teachers were using.
Great, and this is the experience also from a context like Zambia, where all of a sudden teachers started becoming a bit more creative and using their smartphones more, or even meeting up with other teachers. So that's great to see that happened elsewhere as well. Okay, great. I see there are other questions in the chat. Let me start now. This one's for Nicholas. Nicholas, a question about South Africa. So the question is, in South Africa, the public provision for early childhood is not there. How are you working on it so that even the younger ones can be involved? Over to you, Nicholas.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I think at the beginning of my presentation, the setup of ECD is not sort of a traditional public provision, but it's provided at a community level, often by kind of small NGOs, NPOs, or private providers. And then there's currently a system where if an ECD program meets the eligibility criteria on a kind of needs assessment for government subsidy, then that program can apply for a subsidy. But I think, as I mentioned, there's a pretty broad acknowledgement within the sector in South Africa that that system is not working so well, because some of the challenges are that even though the system is meant to be set up in a way that the needy children are able to access government subsidy funding for attending ECD programs, the way that the registrations system is set up and the sort of criteria for registration mean that the most needy ECD programs are actually not able to navigate that process and become registered, and therefore become eligible to apply for the funding from government. And so it's not working so well right now. But the encouraging thing is that the government acknowledges that and is working with the sector to revise how this system of registration works, how the sort of norms and standards are set up so that the most needy centers are able to access that subsidy funding. But I think that, in the longer term, there's also probably going to be a rethinking of the funding model and whether a subsidy per child per day subsidy is the most appropriate mechanism, or whether there are better ways of doing it. So I think from our perspective, we've been trying to support in getting the kind of baseline data that is needed. And that's why the census project was so important. And then, working with the government to really develop a system that is fit for purpose and is accessible to ECD programs, so that whether it's to do with funding or quality assurance and improvement, all of these aspects kind of coalesce in a way that serves the children best. That was a bit of a roundabout answer, but I hope a useful one. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So not there yet, but work in progress to address the issue of the younger ones and the most vulnerable ones. Okay, that's fine. So now I see there's another question which addresses or tries to investigate the technological aspect. So I think it's Chow and Pavan again to respond to this. What about the students and internet access? How did the teachers interact with the students? Maybe you can tackle that one, Pavan.
Yeah, sure. See, there were different ways in which this was tackled. Very first thing the teachers did was to identify how many of their students have access, and parents of the students had access to the internet first. And then this was actually led by the government themselves. You see, government supported teachers to make this quick survey kind of a thing with the help of local community and also the partner NGOs. And slowly, there was a kind of list prepared at the school level to identify which of these students had access to mobiles or which student didn't have access to mobile or any other digital access, activities or gadgets. So the department or the government started tackling this at various levels. One was the satellite programs was launched, which necessarily didn't require all households to have connection to the private cable system, because nationally free channels were made use for that. And second thing, slowly when the things started sorting out in terms of pandemic, we statewide program called we call it in our language, using the community spaces for the better cause came into place. For example, we started using temple complexes. We started using the village corridors, or some of the big households in the villages as a community space, learning community spaces. And it was a very interesting to see how communities at the village and the park NGOs came together to address this challenge. Actually, I mean, it doesn't mean that we were able to reach every student there. There were a couple of challenges, but we tried our best to do that.
Great, thank you so much. Pavan, there's a follow-up question on technology. Were devices provided to educators, or was this basically they had to use their own? So was there a procurement or a supply of devices to educators to ensure that they would have access to these professional development programs?
Yep. See, I already said that this was a zero budget thing because the pandemic hit and most of the budget shifted towards the healthcare system. And we had very little budget offered to the education systems, and we had this challenge everywhere. So unfortunately, we couldn't, support teachers with anything as such. But I have very interesting data which shows that the smartphone usage in India and especially Karnataka has risen very drastically from 2016. It was just 22% in 2016, and it raised up to 54% now. And there is a very clear smartphone penetration even in the rural parts of our state. And second thing, well before COVID, the central government of India and the state government of India had started a couple of online professional development programs, which was really a blessing to us. We call it as a Diksha portal, where it's a common professional development platform which is created by Ministry of Human Resource Development. So having said this, most of the teachers had access to smartphones, and it was really helpful to us.
Great, thanks, that's clear. Okay, I think we have another question for Nicholas now. I don't know where it's coming from, but anyway, it's regarding the ECD sector again. So in the ECD function shift front, do you know the plan that the DOE have with the underqualified existing ECD practitioners in South Africa? Is there a particular interest or focus of the Lego Foundation in South Africa to focus on capacitating and developing these practitioners that are available? Over to you, Nicholas.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I think the challenge in terms of upskilling ECD practitioners in South Africa is significant. And I think that the census data and the information that's coming in really underscores that challenge. In terms of the DBE's kind of particular approach that they're going to take, I can't really speak to that. However, in terms of the second point of the interest of the Lego Foundation, I think it's certainly a space that we have worked in the past through partners and which we are planning on continuing to work in, because in terms of the different levers for basically improving child outcomes, I think a really central one is at the practitioner and classroom level. And so we acknowledge that there's an immense amount of work that needs to be done, and we do see ourselves playing a role, and we do have a few initiatives in the pipeline. I can't go into tons of detail, but just to say that we certainly are planning on working in this space and supporting the DBE to really take on this massive challenge of upskilling ECD practitioners and providing kind of, I guess, the words articulation in terms of career development of ECD practitioners. So certainly, yes, we will be staying involved in that area. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. Okay, now I pass over to Chow for a totally different question. Was it an easy process to convince the government partners to switch to online modalities? And what were the advantages and disadvantages of online modalities applied in capacity building activities in your project?
Yes, thank you. So it was not an easy process, I have to say. So when the COVID came and then everything stopped, the school were closed, and then our activity in the project also stopped. We finished developing the guides on learning through play with the government. So the government also get involved in development of the guide with us, and we were about to conduct series of trainings for the government staff and for the staff of the provincial department of education and training, and for hundreds of school leaders in the primary school in our project area. But then on of those training stopped. We planned it, but because the COVID broke out, and then those trainings stopped, and then we had to wait like 1 month to see if the situation improved, and then now it was still like that, and we started to discuss with the government. Okay, now I think we think that we should move ahead. We should not wait, because we don't know when the COVID is over. The vaccine is not there in Vietnam yet. At that time, we didn't have vaccine yet, so everything is closed. The government ordered everything to be closed. So the military said, no, wait, maybe in 1 month, in 2 months, the situation would get better. And then we will organize a face-to-face, in-person training, because they believe that only the in-person training for teachers that will be effective. And then the teacher will learn the learning through play techniques in the in-person or face-to-face training. They didn't believe that the online learning also help with that. And then we waited for several weeks more, and then the situation was still there, was still like that. They didn't get improved at all. So we came back with the military in several meetings. So we started to show them, okay, if in this province the quarantine is still, if the measure still asks for everyone to stay at home, then we would do the individual online learning. And in other provinces, if the situation got a little bit better, so the government allow like a small group of 20 people, then we would do a group-based online learning. So we had different scenario for each province, and then we presented to them. And we also share with them the online tools. The online tools will be used in the training to show them that, okay, although this is the learning techniques, the teaching techniques training, but we don't need to, if we cannot, the trainer cannot see the participant, then we still have the online tools so that the trainer can still get the participant interested and still get the participant involved in the learning activities. So we show them those online tools, and then finally they agree to try out very first online training in one of the province in the central province of Vietnam, in Quảng Trị. And then we had like 60 teachers in one group of training. And then we had like 7 training, 15 training first, and then with the close supervision of the ministries, they attended, they monitor, and they saw, okay, the online training for the learning techniques for teacher also was quite okay, although they still said that it cannot be as effective as the in-person training, but for the time being, it was the solution because we could not wait. So so it was not an easy process at all. So after each training, they sit down with us to give feedbacks. Hey, project, we need to revise the program like this. We need to shorten this session. We need to change those online tools because it was too complicated for teacher. We should limit the number of online tools in those trainings. So we had close discussion, in-depth discussion to revise for the next trainings. So it was not an easy process, but luckily that finally they agree and we try out and it was okay. Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like after the initial resistance, there was actually a lot of co-creation, a lot of collaboration, a lot of negotiation and dialogue on it. Okay, yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chao. There's a question here for Nicholas. Nicholas, what were some of the biggest challenges you found in conducting the census fieldwork, and what were some of the emerging results that have surprised you in the course of this exercise?
So I think because this kind of activity had never been attempted in South Africa, we really had to think carefully about how to approach it. And there wasn't an existing master list to work off. So we worked with a really exceptional fieldwork company that developed different strategies for going into communities and identifying ECD programs. So we took all of the best available data that we had, and we were able to build off a previous effort that had started during COVID called the Vangasali Initiative, which was about ECD programs kind of putting their hands up and self-identifying, but that was unverified data and often not that easy to work with, but that was a starting point. And then field workers sort of followed quite a rigorous strategy of first working off the existing data that was available, and then going through a process of visiting local ward councillors, visiting education officials or social development officials within a particular ward or district, and asking them for any information they had on lists of ECD programs. Then there was just the kind of good old snowball sampling method of when you find a program, asking about any others that are in the area, getting lists, getting access to ECD forums that are groups of ECD programs that often have shared WhatsApp groups or information that they share between each other. So and then just field workers driving through areas and asking people on the street and looking for programs physically. So it was a variety of strategies that in the end worked really well, and I think that the coverage we achieved was really impressive, and I cannot give enough credit to the teams that really scoured every single part of the country to find and map out these programs. But it wasn't an easy activity, especially in more rural areas. So it came with many challenges. One other thing, we initially perceived or thought that there may be resistance from ECD programs to welcome field workers into their centers and engage with them. We thought that there may not be a willingness to kind of participate, but we were pleasantly surprised that for the vast majority, and I think the refusal rate was in the very low, like 2 to 3% in the end. There was a willingness to open their doors, to engage. I think also it's just part of the optimism around the sector changing and around the government showing that they were serious about finding everyone and including everyone, even if you weren't registered already with the government. So yeah, that was really encouraging. And then maybe one or two emerging findings. I mean, I mentioned a few, but some of the things that have come through, I think, which perhaps surprised me. I mean, there's huge discrepancy. Often we did analysis by quintile, which is kind of sort of 5 groups of poorest areas to most well off, and the discrepancies we see across a lot of domains, from fees paid to learning and play resources in centers. They follow such a stark gradient in terms of the quintiles, and even things. I mean, we, from a Lego Foundation perspective, we're interested in a few variables around learning through play or children's sort of play opportunities, and something which came out really, really strongly was just the amount of time and opportunity children have for free play in ECD programs followed a very steep gradient by quintile, with the most well-off centers offering more time for free play, and the kind of least well-off offering, significantly less, if any. So it's, as I said, the analysis is ongoing, and the launch will be sometime in May, but lots of interesting insights coming through. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Nicholas. It does point to the fact that maybe teachers are not skilled enough to understand the importance of play, in a child's learning journey at that age. So it goes back to the issue of upskilling these teachers. Great, thank you so much. And now we'll take a last question for Pavan, and then we'll do some concluding remarks, and we'll close off as promised a bit early. So Pavan, over to you. Can you elaborate on the research on behavior change you mentioned? Are there any current studies led by STIR Education that can look into this aspect of behavior change? Can you just give us a couple of words on that? Thank you.
Sure, Anna. Anna, behavior change studies currently focuses on indicators like curiosity, engagement, critical thinking at all levels of officials, at teacher and official level. We have, while we qualitatively observe these changes and discuss this qualitatively and quantitatively using our inbuilt app, that's one way we collect the data. And these comes up the discussion every month. We call it as a monthly progress check meetings or reflection meetings, which happens both internally and externally with the stakeholders. And there is another study which happens for quite a longer time. We call it as a longitudinal study, where we study the impact of our interventions over a period of time. And this is done by the third party, to keep it more objective and, keep it out of bias, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Pavan. Okay, great. Okay, I think now we will basically conclude the session. I think some takeaways that I have, from listening to you, all the presentations, I think what has come out of this session is that the partnerships evolved a lot during COVID-19, and I heard a lot about flexibility, agility, changing in programming. So it does reflect the need that we found, all of us as education practitioners, to actually be agile and not to be fixated on deliverables and curriculum delivery and all that. So we had a lot of flexibility. We had to have flexibility, and I think the government also displayed a lot of flexibility. And then also another takeaway is the need to have a very contextual and approach. So basically looking at the needs of very, very decentralized at the very decentralized level. So not looking at the government anymore as the one that makes decision, but looking at more at the districts, at the zones, at the very decentralized level to inform decisions. And also another key takeaway I have heard from all your presentations is the relationship of trust. and collaboration that was built out of this period, and the need for a continued dialogue, and the need for ongoing collaboration and co-designing, which emerged out of the situation, just to keep above the water, indeed. And then another interesting thing that I heard mentioned by Pavan in one of his presentations was about the social emotional support. I think that's something that's very true. In many of the programs, we hear that teachers, also required social emotional support themselves. So we tend to focus on the needs of the learners, but in this case, I think we have had to also acknowledge the need for something like social emotional support also for teachers. So kudos to you as a program, STIR, who have also, spent time thinking about that. And the same, I think, would go for also the program in Vietnam. Great. I think with that, we can close off the webinar, unless my colleagues, the panelists, would like to say something more, as a last final remark. Otherwise, we can close the webinar. So I give you just a couple of seconds to see if you have any question or any intervention that you want to say as a closing remark. Otherwise, we will close the session. So Chow, anything you'd like to mention?
No, just want to say thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. And also, Nicholas, anything that you would like to conclude with?
No, just to say, yeah, thanks for all of the engagement. It's been great to be able to present a bit of our work, and yeah, to feel this kind of wave of progress and positivity within the ECD sector in South Africa. It's really it feels good. So yeah, I'm glad to share some of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicholas. Clearly very passionate about this whole development. Pavan, anything that you would like to conclude with?
Nothing, and I think I was very excited to see a lot of questions from people down there, and that was very, very interesting also as well. Thanks a lot for that.
Thanks. I agree. Thank you very much to our audience, to the participants. Thank you very much for the nice questions. We really enjoyed this interaction. And of course, a big thank you to the Skoll Foundation for allowing this to happen. So from us, a big goodbye and thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the afternoon and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Bye.